Have you ever wondered how to release that neck from long days of sitting, or if you carry excess tension in your neck? Here's a couple of little mobility drills that you can use with a trigger point ball that'll make your life a little bit nicer if you carry a lot of neck tension. The first one we have is our simple trigger point ball over the midsection of our neck here, and we're going to grab that ball in our hand, big high elbow, and we're going to place it in the midsection of our neck. Now that muscle beside the spine, that's what we're aiming for, and pushing that ball into that recess there. We're simply adding a bit of tension through the palm of that hand, and we're pulling that ball down along the neck. It should come down on a diagonal aspect, and we're simply pulling across the muscle. Once we've done that there for a few times, we can use some head tilts with that pressure still on that ball through the hand, pushing in with that nice high elbow. The next one is the base of our skull. We're aiming for that muscle on the side of the spine there. And we're going to lay down and we're going to place that ball in the divot that we find right about here at the base of our skull next to that muscle. That should be a soft little trigger point, and the rule with the trigger point is wriggle around until you find that point that works for you. You might feel a little bit of discomfort and you might feel that pain radiate through the top of your head, and that's okay. Back the tension or the amount of force you push into the ball to something comfortable that works for you. So we're going to lay down and we're going to grab that ball and we're going to place it into that little recess that we've identified at the base of our skull. If we can't find the position, we simply just wriggle around until we get it. We can turn our head, raise it up and down. Once we've got it, we can help by keeping that ball into position with our fingers clasped around the ball like so. And we're simply going to draw some circles with our chin. And then we're going to shake our head and back to those circles. Once we find a little sore spot, we're going to sit there for a little bit and we're going to push our head into that ball. Remembering to breathe throughout the whole process and being nice and relaxed. If we grab that tension, we're not going to release that trigger point. So circles, head shakes, and then pushing into that ball. Once you feel that pain start to drop off and dissipate, that's starting to have its effect. You could be there for 2 to 3 minutes, simply working on that one trigger point. Now, don't forget to do each side, notice the differences, and see how you go. Long days of sitting, lots of pull-ups, both have something in common. They both use our lats or stress our lats, and as our lats are internal rotators, that can push us into that rounded shoulder we see, which we want to avoid when we talk about posture. So here's a lat release that will help keep you nice and upright and open, particularly if you've got a lot of pulling based movements in your training. This is something you're going to want to do. So trigger point ball here, laying down on our side. When we get there, we're finding the recess between our delt and our lat here. So you'll find that natural crease in your arm, and we're going to place that ball right in there and put some pressure on it. Once we're here, we simply wriggle around until we find the position. Once you get into position, it might feel a little ropey if you haven't been in here before, a little bit tender. We're simply just going to roll over the ball like so. If we find a sore spot, we're going to sit on it and breathe into it. The trick is here to take our time and let the pain naturally fall away the more we spend in there. Once we get there and we feel it dropping off, we can add those turns back in, and we can simply keep working along that line between the delt and the lat until we feel that we've given a little bit of release through the area there. So there you have it, guys, a simple trigger point ball release for those muscles that we often forget about because it's not our pec or our thoracic, but just as important when we talk about posture. Pec release. So sitting, rounded shoulders, lots of pushing movements. We want to make sure we're releasing our pecs in an efficient manner. So trigger point ball here, and we need to find a doorway or something where you can sort of step through the gap, because we need some leverage on that pec to be able to release it properly. So I'm going to use the rack here, and I'm going to show you how to release your pecs with a trigger point ball. So you find a point on the edge of the wall or the doorway or wherever you are, and you're simply going to take a staggered stance and push yourself into that ball. So what we're looking to push into here is the fold between your pec and your front delt. That is the area we're targeting. So we find that spot, find out how we can leverage it through the door or the rack if we're at the gym, and we're simply going to raise our arm and turn our thumb downwards. So we're going to internally rotate that shoulder. By turning our thumb downwards, we get a little bit more pressure against the ball, and we're mashing into that pec like so. If we're really tender, we simply just go back to arm sweeps. But if we need to get right into that joint, we are going for the mash and the arm sweep combo. Now you can bring your thumb back up and raise that arm above your head a little bit, and that will give you another effect again. And we're simply sitting here rolling across that area between the front delt and the pec until we feel that release. The test you can do after this, if you want to, you can get on your back and do a rib grab and reach and see how much more you open up. But this is a great way to open those shoulders and release those pecs after a lot of pressing or a lot of sitting at a desk typing away on our computers. Traps and thoracic release. We can do that with a simple ball. Now, usually you would have seen it with a foam roller, laying on the ground, hands across, and you're rolling out across your thoracic, and then you're rolling up and down your back. Probably not the best way or the most optimal piece of kit to release it, because we can't get onto that trigger point and that little targeted approach that we like to help release our thoracic and our trap. But we can do it all in one go on each side with a trigger point ball. So the way we set up for our trap release, we simply grab the ball in the opposite hand and we're placing that over our shoulder. Now we're aiming for the crest or the corner of our scapula here. So you'll feel it through there, and we're aiming for that position with the ball. So hand over the top, into position here. Now once we're here, we're simply going across that muscle, and you'll feel it. It might feel a little bit ropey if you haven't done it before, and we're rolling across your trap like so. Once you feel that release, you can start to slowly move down the thoracic, which we grab the ball and we simply use our other hand, our same hand of the side that we're on now, to place it into position. Now from here, we can open that shoulder blade or the scapula by bringing our arm across our body, giving ourselves a big hug. And we can move up and down that thoracic. Nice and easy. If you hit a sore spot, remember those cross frictions, slight movements up and down, really push into those little trigger points, up and down the entire thoracic until the pain starts to dissipate or the discomfort starts to drop away and you feel like you can push a little bit more weight in it. Things to note with your feet, you might be a little bit further away from the wall. That's creating leverage to push into the wall. Don't be afraid to step away from the wall a little bit. If we're into position, let's try the other side now, for instance. We can leverage by bringing our feet away if we need to create more leverage for more pressure. There you have it, guys. Trap and thoracic using your trigger point ball against your wall. Better than a foam roller, so grab one of these and see how you go. We spend so much of our days on these two little things right here. Now, we talk about trigger point, we look at our quads, our pecs, our lats, all that sort of stuff, all of these muscles. But do we neglect our feet? Here's a foot release that you can use when you are running, squatting, deadlifting, or doing any type of lower body movement, And it's also great if you're in a sedentary standing position for your work job. Having the blood flow through the base of the foot and through the fascia is a really important part to moving well and releasing those restrictions when we see ankle restrictions or limitations in our squat. So let's have a look at it. We've got a ball on the floor and we're going to stand on it. That's pretty much as simple as it is. So all we're going to do now is go searching for these little trigger points around our foot, and when we hit one, we're going to squeeze our toes like we're trying to pick the ball up, and we're going to roll out that foot. So if you feel a trigger point there, you're going to spend some time on it. You can try and stamp out the cigarette on the floor, so by pivoting on the ball. You can roll across it like a cross friction. And you can spend your time rolling out those trigger points at the base of your foot. Now, a really interesting test you can do straight after this is your ankle mobility test. If you feel like you have limitations there and limited range, you can do your foot release and test, and you might find releasing some of that tension in your feet increases your range of motion. So once you're there, squeezing the toes like you're trying to pick the ball up, putting out the cigarette or cross frictions across that ball, spend some time releasing those feet and they will thank you for it. Running, jumping, burpees, bounding, anything that involves an explosive lower body movement is going to involve your calves. Now, if you run a lot, you might find you get tight either in your calves or your anterior tibialis, which is that muscle beside your shin bone. Here's a calf release and an antib release that will help keep the tension out of that lower limb to help you put more Ks in your legs or keep you moving better for longer. So let's start with the antib because we're here. What we're going to do is clasp that ball with our fingers interlocked like so. And we're going to drag this ball up the leg until we find a little sore spot. Once we find that spot, we're going to pull that ball into that sore spot and we're simply going to breathe. If that's not causing too much discomfort, we're going to raise that leg up off the ground, which is where you might feel most of that tension now. And from there, we're keeping the tension on the ball pulled into our antib there, and we're going to conduct some foot circles. So 4 foot circles one way and 4 foot circles other way. If you've got some pretty old ankles from wear and tear, i.e. sprains, strains and things like that, if they start to crackle and pop, don't worry. If there's a bit of pain, we probably need to go and see someone. Now, once we do our foot circles one way and foot circles the other, we're going to bring our foot back. So we're going to bring those toes back as far as we can, and we're going to let that foot drop. So no control over this. We're simply letting our foot slap down to the bottom there. And we're going to do 4 of those. Once we complete that, we can go back into our foot circles and then our foot drops as many times as we need until we feel that loosen up or we get a bit of improvement there. Things you can do straight after this is test your ankle mobility. If you do your antib release and you've got ankle mobility issues, test that range. Hopefully we've gone into either 2 to 4 inches of acceptable range of motion or 4 plus if we can get there. But you should test after you do these types of things to know if it's moved the needle, particularly if you are looking to improve your performance. All right, now comes our calf release. The big things to remember with your calf, you have a lateral and a medial aspect. The lateral is the outside, the medial is the inside, and then you've also got a center line on your calf. So you want to hit all 3 positions when you're doing this release. Now, if you've got a yoga block, you can put the ball on top of the yoga block, but if you're bootstrapped and you're only using a ball, this is how you do your calf release. So if we compress our calf, i.e. we push into it and we find the widest part of our calf. Now, once we find the widest part of our calf as we look at it, we're simply going to put the ball underneath the widest part of our calf and we're going to put it on the floor here. To add the extra weight to make sure we get the right trigger point release in there, we're going to bring this foot up and on top of it. That adds a bit of direct pressure down onto the calf and allows us to get more traction when we want to release the calf. Now from here, we're in the center line. We're going to do those foot circles we talked about with the anterior tibialis release. We're going to foot circles one way. If you fall off the ball, that's okay. Just fix yourself. Foot circles the other. So that's 4 foot circles the other way. And then we go into those foot drops. So don't forget to wriggle around and try and find those trigger points as well. And then once we do the center line, we're going to move out onto the lateral aspect by rotating our toes outward. So we're going to conduct those foot circles once we find that trigger point, 4 one way, 4 the other, and we're going to do the foot drops here. Okay, once we do the lateral aspect, we're going to internally rotate that hip again and go onto the inside or the medial aspect of our calf. So the foot comes back on, foot circles, both ways, and then we do our foot drops. So we can do this as much as we want across either line. You might find you might be tighter internally, so the medial or the lateral. I spend more time there. I would spend more time on the bits that are more tender than the others to make sure you even out that calf. And like I said, make sure you test your ankle range or ankle mobility after you do it. If you've got problems in your squat like local front knee pain or anything like that, do your anterior release, do your calf release, retest your squat and see if there's any improvement there. Here is our quad release. As we find, when we squat, lift, carry, and load things, we're inherently going to have tight quads the more lower body type work we do, and it's important to release them in ways that are going to free up our range of movement to allow us to get to the correct depth in our squat and allow us to move effectively. So we're going to use the ball and the roller today, and we're going to cover a quad release, an ITB release, and a VMO release, which is a part of our quad, but that's that the teardrop part of our quad here. We'll use the ball for that. So first things first, we'll do our quad release. Now, we're going to get that roller, and I know you see everyone rolling both legs at the same time. We're going to go to a single leg at a time on our roller. We're going to come down to our elbows here, and we're going to start just above our knee. From here, we're just going to simply inch our way back and forth as we slowly creep up the leg. If we hit a sore spot, we're going to cross friction across that roller. So we're going to drag that quad left and right across the roller. We're then going to add some knee bends. Once we add some knee bends, we then go back to that back and forth motion up the quad. Hit another spot, cross frictions, knee bends. And we work our way all the way up to that quad as high as we can go. Now, the ITB. I'll roll over onto this side now. We're going to do the same, starting at the bottom of just above our knee, and we're going to use this leg to support. And we're simply back and forth, slowly creeping up our quad. If we hit that trigger point again, we're going to go back and forth on those cross frictions. We can try and add a knee bend if we need, but on the side it probably won't have as much of impact because you're not contracting the ITB directly as opposed to when we're on the front of our quad. So we're simply going to roll up and down, cross friction when we hit a sore spot, and progress all the way up that ITB. Now, if you want to come back down the lateral aspect of your quad here, you can, which is in between your ITB and the front of your quad. You might notice there are also some tight spots there. So we're simply coming back down the quad on the lateral aspect of it, and we're pivoting, cross frictions, and knee bending as we find our sore spots there. So spend a bit of time using your foam roller. You can get harder rollers if that becomes too easy and doesn't give enough feedback through there. Now we're going to go through a VMO release using our ball. So in that position that we just identified here, we're going to place that that ball underneath our VMO. We're going to wriggle around until we feel that sore spot. Once we feel that sore spot, we're going to breathe, and we're going to spend a bit of time there, And then we're going to do some little cross frictions using our foot to manipulate the movement. And we're simply going to spend some time here releasing that VMO. Now, if you've got a lot of knee pain or discomfort, or the knees feel tight when you warm up, you want to make sure you're releasing your VMO, your quads, your anterior tibialis, and your calves. So that's all the muscles that surround your knee that have a pulling effect. If something's tight, it's going to pull your kneecap out of alignment potentially and cause you some issues. Now, if you've got pain in your knee, refer yourself out to get someone to look at, but that VMO release should be one of your points of call if you feel like you have stiff knees before activity to get you prepped for moving. There you have it, guys. Quads, VMO, ITB, jump on there before you do any heavy sort of squatting, running, or loading that type of movement. So our power muscles, the old glutes, often cop a lot of work in our lifting, running, and our sedentary sitting lives. So it's important that we know how to release those glutes. And I'm also going to take you through a lateral hip release to show you how to release those sides of your hips, which will also become tight and stiff if you spend long hours at the desk or you take up those bipedal activities such as running. So the positional stuff for our glute release, which we'll work on today, I want you to think of two things, and it's all about your clothing. So I want you to think about the top of your back pocket and then your belt line. So working our glute release, which is going to release our piriformis and the surrounding area, we're looking for placing that ball at the top of our pocket on our jeans. So that's the easiest way to think about it, but that's going to look like so. So it's going to be on the little higher side of your glutes, but we're simply going to wedge that in. And the way to find it is we're simply just going to roll around until we hit that trigger point on that piriformis. Now, you'll know that when you either grimace, your face changes, or you might take a deep breath, or you might feel that referral pain or referral discomfort down your leg, meaning we're hitting the nerve that runs down your leg. And what we're going to do is simply sit on that position, and we're going to start doing some clamshells. Once we do 4 or so clamshells there, we're going to go into some kicks. 4 kicks. And then from there, we're going to go into pivots. So we're going to draw a circle with our glutes on the floor. So by keeping the pressure on that ball, we're going to circle one way and then circle back the other. And you can repeat that as many times as you need to release your glutes. Now, your lateral hip release, we're thinking of that belt line. So from the piriformis, we're going to come up a little bit, and then we're also going to lay on a side supported position to hit that lateral part of our hip. So side supported, we can extend that bottom leg, and we use our top leg to brace our position. Now we're simply bringing our hips up off the ground, and we're going to cross friction left and right or back and forth across that lateral aspect of our hip. Now this might also trigger some referral pain down the sciatic nerve, and that's okay too. We simply take more weight on the elbow and more weight on the leg in order to keep ourselves up off the ball into a position that we can maintain tension or pressure on it, but not push into pain. So we're simply going to pivot back and forth along that lateral hip line as far as we need to feel that release. There you have it, guys. Lateral hip, glute release to keep those power muscles in working order. So you've been sitting at the desk all day and you want to get out for a run or get to the gym and get the most out of your training. If we've been in this position, sitting, regardless if it's sitting just on the floor or sitting in an office chair all day, we want to make sure our hip flexors are in good condition to make sure we can get into full hip extension to make sure we're maximizing our training. So our psoas, which is a group of muscles that works from your lower back all the way through the front of your hips, which incorporates hip extension. What we want to use is our trigger point ball here, and we're going to do a psoas release, which is going to be located an inch beside our belly button. Now, pretty easy to find for yourself when you put your finger in your belly button and we go an inch beside it. We're going to get that ball, we're going to lay down on it, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways to help release those hip flexors to help you get into full extension. So ball, inch beside the belly button, and we're laying down. We're simply just going to wriggle around until we find that trigger point. If you don't have a trigger point here or you can't find the stiffness, that's actually a good thing. It means our hip flexors probably are in relatively good shape, or we just simply don't have any work we need to do here, or we simply missed it, which isn't a bad thing. But we'll cover off on a lot of hip extension drills in our mobility section. So if you can't get this particular one, because it can be tricky, don't worry, we'll loop around, we'll get it anyway. So once we find that point, we're simply going to breathe in, into the ball. And on the breath out, we're going to arch up. Once we come back down, we're going to breathe in again. But this time when we arch up, we're going to grab some traction off the floor and try and pull ourselves a little bit across the floor like so. And we're going to relax. The next stage is raising that leg on the same side that ball's on. So we're going to lower our head, breathe in. On our breath in, we're going to arch up, pull forward and raise the leg. And we come down. And we're going to repeat that particular element as many times as we need to feel that pain drop off or that discomfort drop off. And we're going to use that traction to really push into the ball and release that psoas. So there you have it, guys. A handy little hip flexor release to help offset all those hours sitting at a desk. Long days of sitting, we all suffer from a little bit of lower back stiffness or pain. Here's a nice little QL release we can do to help release the tension in our lower back that'll help free up our posture and avoid some of that negative effect when we spend long days at the desk. So we're aiming for our QL. That is located on the side of our, next to our spine in that section in our lower back. What you would probably think of as the bit next to the gap where your kidneys are. But that muscle we're aiming for the edge of that muscle. We're going to grab that ball and we're going to find that edge. We're going to lay down. We're going to bring this leg up over the other leg, and we're simply pivoting over that QL. At no stage should this ball go over your spine. If you've gone over your spine, you've come too far into the midline, and you need to get it on the edge of that muscle. So when you're rolling across it, it should be going out away from you. Once you hit a sore spot, spend some time in there. Breathe into the ball using our diaphragmatic breath. Once the pain drops away, back into those little cross frictions as we go. There you have it, guys. Make sure you do both sides. Notice if there's any difference between sides, but that should help offset some of that sitting and postural stuff that we have when we're at the desk all day. Okay, our hamstrings. Quite often it's a pretty common complaint that we have stiff and tight hamstrings, but before we can mobilize and lengthen that tissue and then add our stabilization work and then integration back into our training, we want to use our trigger point ball here to give ourselves a hamstring release. Now what we're looking for, the position I want you thinking of here, is the crease of your bum and your hamstring. So you're going to be right over the top of that insertion point for your hamstring, and that's where you're going to place the ball. You're going to take a seat on top of that position, and all we want to do is just wiggle around until we find that point at where you can feel a little bit of ropiness of where that hamstring joins to the bone. So once we find that, we're going to sit there, and what we're going to do, we can place a bit of tension by forcing down on our hands, or we can alleviate a bit of pressure by bringing our hands and supporting ourselves. But what we're going to do is some kicks. You might not be able to extend your knee here, that's perfectly normal, and you will feel that down your hamstring. Once we finish doing some kicks, we can then mash across that hamstring, going left and right, and then we simply shimmy down the hamstring with that ball once we've finished there. So we go into our kicks further down the hammy now, then cross friction across the hammy, and then move it down to a lower part of the hamstring. Now we're going to repeat this until we get to the bottom of our hammy or until we feel it not having such an impact. Now you might find you might have multiple positions across the hamstring that you need to hit. Do that too. You don't have to just go down, you can go across and up and down the hamstring. You can even revisit the sore spot, you can come back up the hamstring, go back into those kicks, force back down, use a bit of extra pressure through the hands, go through those cross frictions and then progress back down. We're going to go down the length of the hamstring and that should get our hamstrings ready for mobilization, stabilization and integration into our workout.